I don't know what time it is or what day it is, and it doesn't matter because we're all in quarantine. But I am here today for a virtual visit with David Lee, the proprietor of Cultural Cuba. And his view is considerably more lovely than mine, so I'm feeling a little jealous about that. How you doing today, David?
I would be lying if I complained too much about how I'm doing. Considering the situation, no one needs to be too sorry for me. So let's leave it at that. I'm sheltering in place, as you can see, but in a location that I would choose to be at, even if I wasn't forced to shelter in place. And in fact, believe it or not, where I am, which I can't reveal because, see, my beach is deserted and I just don't want to tell anyone.
Yeah, definitely keep that buttoned up.
I have to keep it that way. So I'm actually able to surf every day and paddleboard and never come close to anyone that I have to be concerned about. So it's a nice situation.
So tell me, who all is sheltering in place with you? What's your setup? Are you with?
I have I shouldn't go this necessarily in order of importance, but I have my beagle Lucy with me, and she was out here, so she could have been prominently displayed in this interview. But I have my family. My oldest son is a sophomore in college, and he is back home reluctantly. Truth is, I don't even know why I need to whisper because no one's out here right now, but
it's just you, me, and a million people watching.
Let's call it the lemonade out of the lemons for me is I would not normally have him here during what would be his spring break. So having my buddy and best friend to surf with and spend extra time with is
so nice.
Awesome. So I've got my loved ones around me, and yeah.
Good.
I will say it's apropos that I am smoking a cohiba right now, and also partaking in one of my favorite beverages, which I don't know if you can even see it on this camera, but there you go, the Havana Club rum.
Havana Club, I have mine.
I'd like to pretend that it's I could pretend it was all about culture first, but the reality is it did start with the cigars and the rum. So I lived another lifetime ago. I lived in Central Europe. That was my home. And I picked up this terrible habit of smoking Cuban cigars, which you couldn't get in the US, but you could get there. And then someone who knew a lot more than I did let me know the secret that it's not about Scotch, believe it or not. It's about high-end rum. And I didn't even know there was such a thing, honestly. But now things have changed, right? Everything's becoming high-end. And every liqueur, everyone's looking for, they all have their niche. But I didn't know at the time that there was such a thing. So I learned about cigars and rum, became a fan, and that led me to start thinking more about Cuba. The history of Cuba fascinated me, especially recent history as it pertains to the United States. I got into Cuban music from there, and it just kind of extrapolated it. And Cuba was going to be a kind of place that I was going to go visit at some point. There was no question. So this is pre the changes that Obama made, of course.
Right.
But I succeeded, and I did a couple more trips that year. This was not a business. It was like a hobby. I traveled back and forth, brought friends and family, and just, because I enjoyed myself there, and I wanted to learn more about the culture and get more experience. And I started receiving phone calls from people I didn't even know that had heard that we were doing these.
You were the guy.
Cuba.
People were like, I know a guy.
Yeah, you seem to be a guy. And I'm like, no, not that guy. I don't even want to be thought of as that guy. I don't know what that means, and I don't, But let's just put it this way. Now I'll flash forward at least a few years. One thing led to the other, and I realized that no one was doing private travel to Cuba. They were doing, private customs. So there were companies in existence that were doing these big bus tours, as I like to call them. Like, you get together with 25 strangers, you're on fixed dates. It was a cookie cutter itinerary situation. And they were traveling over that way. That's not how I like to travel. It's not how most people I know like to travel. And in particular, Cuba's one of those places that you need to have spontaneity. You need to have, um, let's call it this way. You need to have things customized for you and your desires to really get the most out of it. Plus, there are things that you will not be able to see and do and experience if you're with a group of 30 people. It just, it's not the best way to go.
Right.
So that basically, again, definitely long story short, Cultural Cuba was born out of that desire. I love introducing people to Cuba. It just, it refuels that passion all over again. So, and it's a special place.
It really is, and it has such an air of mystique about it, and people are really, I mean, it's very intriguing. And so I've been doing these interviews for about a week, and most of the places I'm very conversant in, right? So like Italy is a no-brainer. Greece, I spoke to my friend from Greece, and I'm like, okay, everybody comes, and the typical routing is Athens, Mykonos, Santorini, or Israel. We're like, oh, it's Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Petra. So
right.
What is, I don't know though, because I've only been to Cuba once. I did it in a way that would make you cringe. I went off a cruise ship. Don't hate me. But I loved it. We had a double dip. We were there 2 days. And I loved every minute, and I want to go back. But so what is, for a first timer who's going to go to Cuba, what's like the traditional itinerary you'd recommend?
Okay. Well, first of all, again, because everything we do is private and custom, we don't have any
Bespoke, I get that.
But the reality is, Havana is what you need to see. That's the experience that you need to have, especially the first time you go. And I believe there's a little bit of a misnomer out there that you need to circumvent the entire island or go to other cities besides Havana. It's a beautiful, very large island. It's the length of California, not the width, but the length of California, right? It's big. The next nearest city would be 4 or 5 hour drive to a city where you would want to spend the night, where there's enough to do that you could be there more than, a day and go on a day trip. So the reality is, and this is probably the vast majority of our trips, are Havana focused. You live and stay in Havana, and they don't have to be more than 3 to 5 nights. So it's just a very easy place for Americans to travel to, and you do not need it to be longer than a long weekend.
Right.
And it's such a short flight from most destinations that it lends itself perfectly for that type of trip. So what do you need to do? One, you need to see Havana. Ideally, you'd like to get out into the countryside, at least for a day trip, but you can do that if you stay 4 nights in Havana. You'll still have time to go out into the countryside. But, it's hard to say top 5 things, top 10 things, let's say, that you need to see and do. Of course, you need to see Old Havana and spend some time there. Ideally, not only do you want to do a walking tour of Old Havana, but you want to have time to just let it soak in, be able to sit in a cafe, watch the world go by, to walk around on streets that are not full of tourists, not the street. There are gorgeous streets that are very renovated, and they're beautiful. And then you walk a block off of those, you're still in the center of Old Havana, but you get to see, I hate to call it real Havana, not that the other part isn't real, but this is untouched, and you get a more witness of where people are actually living, what the dilapidation is like, and how the Cubans live their lives for the most part outside, and their doors and windows are almost always open, and it's just a very open kind of society.
Yeah,
so
every restaurant I ate in there was open air. I didn't eat anywhere that was inside. It was always out.
Okay.
Rooftop, restaurant, out. Yeah.
Right. A lot of that, I mean, worst case scenario, if it's really hot, they usually have an inside part that's air conditioned, but you have a choice. But the idea is literally you get lost in Old Havana and get into some of these sections that, a tour guide, most tour guides aren't taking you. That's when you get a slice of life that you would never normally see anywhere else in the world. And the people are so friendly and warm and welcoming. They will talk to you. They'll invite you into their house. But what our guides try to accomplish with every single trip is like, this is more traveling with a local friend, a very fun local friend who is obviously bilingual, but that's the kind of more of the attitude. And so even though you have an itinerary, you're not a prisoner to it. The idea is we're going to do this, we're going to do that. If there's no time for this, it doesn't matter that it's on the itinerary. We're
Right.
skipping it. Well, we might put it on another day if there's time, but look how, we're having so much fun doing this. Let's continue this direction. Let's see where the world takes us today. Some of that. It's like having a good mix of both.
The number one thing everybody wants to do is take that picture in a vintage car, right?
Okay.
Why is that a thing in Cuba? Talk to me about the vintage cars, man. What's up?
Well, listen, and this is the thing. I've actually had people say, "Oh, well, that's really touristy, right?" And I'm like, "Well, listen. First of all, you are a tourist, so let's face it. I mean, if you've never been to Paris, are you not going to get a picture in front of the Eiffel Tower?
100%. We're in an
Of course you
Instagram
are.
society. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, let's not go overboard with off the beaten path, right? It's like you need a combination of that, but you also need to go see everything that's amazingly cool. And yes, there'll be other tourists there. Why? Because it's really cool. It's like, that's why you're there. So here's the cool thing about the cars. They are as real can be. They are everywhere. As soon as you get off the airplane, you will see them. You can't help it. And yes, some of them are in gorgeous condition. We have convertibles from sunset on. We have a fleet of beautifully restored 1950s cars, but they have roofs and they have air conditioning. Obviously, the air conditioning has been put in recently, but they're modified so that they have air conditioning.
That's good.
And those are cool. Those are cool to ride around it. They can be their main car.
Okay.
But then, you do the convertibles. But yeah, it is one of the, you can't go there without doing it.
100%.
You really can't.
All right. So here's my number 2 question.
Yes.
What about the Copacabana? Is that still a thing, and can I go?
Wait, first of all, when you say Copacabana, so not like the, at the Copacabana.
Exactly, the nightclub, right? But the Copacabana was in Miami.
You're referring to the Tropicana.
The Tropicana. Right? Okay, we're going to just edit that part right out of the video.
No,
let's back that up a second.
Leave
David,
it. It's good.
My clients want to know about the Tropicana.
I'm supposed to be the expert, not you. So you shouldn't edit that out. So the Tropicana. Okay. Here's the deal with the Tropicana. I always warn people, if there's anything that is more let's just say this, there is nothing more touristy in Cuba than the Tropicana.
Okay.
If you go there, you just have to be prepared that the entire audience, there will not be any local Cuban nationals there. It is mostly people getting off cruise ships or, these days there's not a lot of cruise ships anymore, but, just the big tour buses in front. It's very kitschy. Can it be fun? Yeah, it can be fun. It's like stepping back in time and witnessing a live Desi Arnaz show.
It's like the Moulin Rouge, but
Moulin Rouge, exactly, right? Or old Vegas, like what Vegas shows might have been in the 50s.
Ring-a-ding-ding.
Ring-a-ding-ding. We got tassels going. The women have fruit baskets, on their heads and the whole thing. Usually we'll tell our clients, though, like, you're not going to want to stay past intermission. So it's just like something to see, get a feel for it. It's kind of cool. Be prepared. There are tourists all around you.
Is there an authentic version of that? Like, is there a nightclub that's like that anymore or not really?
Well, there are awesome nightclubs everywhere. And Havana, it has such a wonderful night scene because so much of Cuban culture is the music. And so there are amazing salsa clubs. So usually what we'll try to do is encourage people, if they want to see that, fine. But then we want them to go to a true salsa club where Cuban nationals are dancing and hanging out, so they get the feel for what that's like. It's an interesting take on the whole concept of, like, how do I explain it? In Cuban culture, if you show up at a place like that, it doesn't matter if you know how to dance, don't know how to dance. First of all, there's no judgment, right? It's very much an atmosphere of dance like nobody's watching.
I love that.
Nobody criticizes it, and nobody can dance salsa like a Cuban. I mean, they're born with their hips moving side to side. I've taken so many salsa. First of all, I'm not a good example, not a great dancer to begin with, but it's a very hard thing to just the steps are really simple, but to really get that sway and that simple movement going. But you go to a salsa club and people will pull you out to dance if they don't see you dancing. And it's very normal and it's not weird and you just go with it.
All the husbands want to know, can I bring the cigars home? How many can I bring? What's the story?
Oh, you mean one of these?
That's, oh, look at that.
I have one on deck because the one I was smoking is almost done. So here's the great news. This is the great news. The Obama administration, there were restrictions on how many Cuban cigars you could bring back. The Obama administration lifted those restrictions to the point where it's virtually unlimited. They usually say, don't bring more than 100 cigars a person. That's 4 boxes.
Okay.
That's a lot. That's more than most people can carry anyway.
Right.
If you were, let's just say you go with your husband, you can bring back 8 boxes of cigars.
Okay.
No problem.
No problem.
No problem at all. And
all right. So souvenirs abound.
I'm always encouraging people. I'm like, why wouldn't you bring them back? I got people that say, but I don't smoke Cuban cigars. I'm like, well, they're gold in the United States.
Absolutely.
Bring them back for your friends. They'll love you to death, you know? So yes, even under the new administration, this hasn't changed. You can bring back literally, 100 cigars a person.
Okay.
And rum, which is a good follow-on question, also unlimited. I don't know how you're going to carry so much rum, but you can take back this rum, which is you cannot find in the United States. And I drink a lot of rum. Rum's my go-to drink. Yes, look at you. Because it's, it's also something you're not going to be able to buy and find in the United States. I always tell people, you got to come back with at least a couple bottles of rum. No question. And this is, depending on what you get, like that bottle's gorgeous because it's been,
this is from Casa Fuster,
it's been Fusterized. But that a 3-year-old rum like that is for making mojitos and rum and cokes, Cuba Libres, which are rum and cokes. But it's their sipping rums, like something like this.
Right.
This is, this rum, it's a blend, but the average age of this rum is over 20 years. And it's the kind of rum, you don't drink it mixed with anything.
No, you see, it's early afternoon here, so I mixed mine, but that's the cheap stuff.
See, I'm all confused about time with this whole
because it doesn't matter.
quarantine thing. I go by the sun and I try to judge, and then I'm like, do I feel like having a cigar and a rum? I do, and then I just try not to look at any clock or anything.
Could be Tuesday at 1. Could be
get
Saturday.
in trouble.
We don't know. So, talk to me about some of the challenges, and this is, you and I have spoken about this before when it comes to clients. Talk to me about some of the challenges now. We're not going to overly politicize the conversation, although I'm sure we could, but we won't.
Even before this whole thing happened, I was just on a road trip throughout the United States talking about this, and people were like, so now that Cuba's closed, like, what are you doing? And Cuba's not closed, and it hasn't been closed. And the reality is that this administration did a few things that certainly scared people and made it feel as if it was closed off or much more difficult to get to, but did not actually reverse all of the changes that Obama had put in place. So it's true that you can no longer go on a cruise ship like you went before. We're not in the business of cruise ships. I never thought that was the best way to see Cuba anyway. It's unfortunate for Cuba because they certainly relied on income from people getting off cruise ships. But other than that, nothing really changed. There are no restrictions. The flights continue. There are more nonstop flights from the U.S. than there ever were before. So it's not charter anymore. It's commercial aircraft flying from Orlando, Tampa, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, JFK, Newark, Atlanta, Houston.
Do
Boston.
Our clients need to get a special visa?
And you still need a visa. But here's the thing. Everyone who goes to Cuba needs a visa. That's nothing to do with the United States. That's a Cuban thing. It's more, think of it more as a, like the typical tax, like departure or entry tax. That's more what a visa is. The difference for an American traveler, unlike everyone else, they have to have an itinerary that meets one of the licenses, they call it, for legal travel for American citizens to go to Cuba. The key point is you're not supposed to be a tourist. what is a tourist, right? The easiest way to explain it, because this is the only restriction that I always think of especially because we do only custom bespoke tours, and we're there to make sure that our clients get what they want and, really experience Cuba as it should be experienced. You're technically not supposed to go stay at an all-inclusive hotel and just hang out on the beach, drinking rum, smoking cigars, doing nothing else, not invoking any of the other aspects of the culture, and just staying in an all-inclusive, which is what a lot of the beach locations, that's all they have, are all-inclusive hotels, like Cancun or the Dominican Republic, Riviera Maya, areas like that we think of as places that are just filled with those kind of hotels. Cuba has been that location for everyone else but Americans. Canadians have thought of Cuba as their inexpensive, all-inclusive beach destination.
Wow, that's an interesting perspective changer.
And so we aren't supposed to go there and spend multiple days sitting in an all-inclusive resort, because then it's hard to say you're not a tourist.
Okay. Can our clients combine a little bit of beach?
A little bit of beach, no problem.
Okay.
And we do it all the time. And the beautiful thing is now there is a true 5-star not all-inclusive, 5-star resort on an island in Cuba. It's beautiful. It's owned by the Kempinski and run by the Kempinski. And so that's something we can combine for clients who want a little bit of beach along with culture. But the reality is that someday, because Cuba has gorgeous beaches, when there are more beautiful resorts, boutique resorts, higher end resorts, will it become a great beach destination? Yes. But right now, it's a cultural destination. In my opinion, there's no reason to go there only for beach. You're missing out on so much. What's so special about going there is not just sitting on a beach. It's the closest, furthest destination you can travel. I have to say, I have to give credit where credit's due, though. That was actually a client of ours who coined that phrase, and posted it. And then I said, I love that. I'm gonna borrow it if it's okay with you. So it defines it very well, especially for those of us who can take a nonstop flight. It's like you are transformed. You leave in the morning, you're in Cuba by lunchtime, and you're in this 500-year-old city that it's much more of a European city with its Spanish, and it has every kind of architecture, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, very Spanish influence. Again, it feels like you're in Europe. And then you've got this incredibly unique culture, and the music and the dance and the arts and even the cuisine and everything. And you're like, oh my God, I'm transported to a whole nother destination. And I flew an hour and a half to get here.
Amazing.
And that's what's so incredible about it. And a lot of people have not been yet. They're just scratching the surface.
Well, I'm thinking that this could be a real big year for it, because people are going to be a little nervous. So I think, Europe may be a little bit slow. I don't know. We'll see. I think people are going to be looking for off the beaten path.
Right.
So hopefully it'll be a big year for Cuba.
Because travel's never far from my mind anyway.
That's how I feel.
I'm it doesn't matter where I am. I'm always thinking about the next destination.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Stay safe, and we'll see you.
This was fun. This is a good way to, spend some of this quarantine time.
Listen, we all have to keep busy. All right. Once again, that's David Lee from Cultural Cuba. And stay tuned. We'll see you soon.
Cheers, everyone. Salud.